about blackmail, which I love.
Yes.
So I'm really interested just the thoughts that we might have on pitfalls of gamification, like we've seen in 15 Billion Merits, the second episode, and just how we can avoid going in that way with gamification.
All right, pitfalls of gamification. And don't think about this as only Q&A time. This is plenty. You guys just jump in because I really do. I want to do discussion. My thoughts. Have you seen Jesse Shell has an amazing video on dangers of gamification. It's his dice talk from 2012, I think. But just look up Jesse Shell dice gamification, and you will find it. It goes into it much more detail and much more cogently than I will presently be able to. I think we really do need to reach out to a lot of people who are currently doing gamification and explain to them how much more there is to games than simply slapping an arbitrary point value on things. And there's plenty of studies which show, there's study after study, that I've actually been doing this a great deal. I have a whole slide deck on exactly this. There have been a lot of studies that show that children who are offered an extrinsic reward for doing problems or doing homework are less likely to do it on their own after that reward is taken away than kids who were just never offered that reward in the first place. And we need to at some point take away that reward. Right? At some point we need to let, we can leave it open for a little bit. I mean, just so that people know.
The doors are locked, so if you close the door, nobody else is going to.
Nobody else can get out.
Luckily we have.
Well, luckily there's a lot of
So, back to when dealing with these gamification questions, we have to demonstrate also, there's a lot of clear demonstrations, right? The one I always bring up is Weight Watchers has attached points to losing weight for going on 50 years now. And it's had some effect. But we've seen when Konami did a study of the weight loss potential of DDR. There are so many people who will lose more weight on DDR than on Weight Watchers program because eventually no amount of points is going to get you on that back on a treadmill that you don't want to be on. But if you just want to go play DDR, you're not going to mind that you're sweating and exhausted. You play DDR, right? And so what we really need to do to avoid gamification systems is show that gamifying doesn't mean building extrinsic rewards, but rather using all the engagement systems, all the ways you learn from the games to make things that aren't engaging.
How does the county kingdom fall into that example? Was that actually sort of lean towards what you're sort of expecting gamification to go?
Well, it's much better than a lot of things. Like, if you look at County Kingdom versus Khan Academy, just in terms of gamification, right? Not in terms of Khan Academy is great. There's a lot of fantastic things that Khan Academy does, but they have their progression scheme and some of these other gamified systems that I think are not anywhere near as effective as just the fact that they make learning clearer and simpler and more personal than most textbooks and modern education. Counting Kingdom makes a real game of mathematics. And so I think that Counting Kingdom is a much stronger example. We can go further, right? We can do a lot more, but it's a good first step.
Okay. In some of the psych studies that I've been reading, one of the big things is keeping track of progress and the concept of small wins. Now that's something gamification can do very well. You're not giving them rewards, you're helping them track their progress.
Right, and this is the very best thing about gamification. When I talk about gamification to a lot of other groups, I was just in Europe talking to the International Baccalaureate about gamifying some of their educational stuff. And badges as a visual representation of progress is the strong aspect of gamification, right? It's not about the extrinsic reward, it's the fact that very often you're doing your math and you don't actually see yourself making progress. You're too deep in it, it's too long of a process, you don't know, and just confirming with us that, yeah, You do get, it's that ding when you level up,
Are you
right?
saying like you can get like an achievement unlock status every time?
Right.
You have mastered algebra part 1.
Yeah.
Right? And instead of at the end of the year, you pass your final and that's it. No. Every couple weeks, you finish the thing and you've got your achievement.
And breaking it down even further, right?
Yeah.
Like, a lot of us don't see the point of homework a lot of the time, like not in general, but in a specific piece of homework, right? You get a group of problems assigned to you, and you're why am I doing this? If that progress bar moves that much closer to you unlocking it, finished Algebra 1, right? All of a sudden it's tangible, you understand that this is part of a larger scheme, and you're actually progressing towards it. Yeah.
Isn't there like an inherent risk in that? Like when you get the gamification system, the homework, for instance, you're basically a lot like students think they're having fun because they're making that progress bar go up, but the teacher might be giving them homework which is completely nonsensical. The teacher isn't giving them the student homework, which they don't think is valuable. Then putting a gamification system on that might provide the motivation, but isn't it really the teacher's problem for not assigning homework which is inherently meaningful?
Well, we have to, we also need to create a set of homework and assignments that are inherently meaningful. That's why I'm saying there's more, I worry about just using that first level of gamification. I think that in games, we play games for the games themselves and not for the point system attached to them for the most part. And we need to take that to the classroom as well.
I think with any education change, there's always the tendency to see it as a magic bullet for the bad teacher or bad parent problem, when not only is there no magic bullet for that problem, but there may not even be a solution for that problem, at least not a classroom level one.
A little more passive gamification. We're talking about math. There's this great online application called Alex, and it does what Khan Academy tries to do, but it kind of makes this big and that points and oh, congratulations. But Alex gives you small little levels that you just move through, and it's all done on like this big pie chart. And it's definitely almost gamified because you get a certain amount of purpose as you advance. But it's way more passive, and I've used them all. And even though it was the least gamey out of all of them, it was the most effective and it was the most engaging because it was way under the radar in terms of its game.
Doesn't Duolingo have like a similar
Yeah,
style, like RPG, level up different things, and once you master, Spanish basic 1, advance the tech tree into
But
something else.
it's really passive because if you don't, it doesn't like give you numbers or badges or achievements because those feel really like, okay. But with Duolingo and Alex, for example, they're really, really deep in their gamification. That it doesn't strike as a game. It feels like
Where does the reward in that come from, though? Because
It's
because
good.
our games, people want to see badges. They want to say, "Oh, I earned that."
I mean, personally, I don't know about you, but I feel way, way more validated by, in Mega Man, getting to the end, being the boss, than being congratulated for my 100th, regular enemy kill. Because Khan Academy will give you, 11, and it feels like a freemium game. Because they give you, 11 achievements when you start playing, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, okay, they lose their value, because it's an achievement for everything.
Then you do have bragging rights. You're
But
like, hey, I got 5,000 game score.
That depends on the user, because sometimes a user will want those badges over anything. Like there's a good application called Untapped, which is for craft beer. And you want to try, it encourages you to try more varieties of different kinds of craft beer to expand your, focus and palate and talk to people. However, you can't focus on that too much to try, I need to try 500 different kinds of beer so I can just get that badge.
Well, and gives you realization of the extrinsic reward becoming more valuable than the activity itself. The activity itself has to be inherently rewarding. Right? You have to love that world of craft beer in this case. Which is why, again, I want to see us go to using the techniques, right? Using things like the engagement curve in education more than using badges and points, because those are useful. Those are ancillary tools. But the real danger, we got this. What is the danger? How do we prevent this danger of gamification? The real danger is stopping at badges and points and thinking that is gamification. But let's move on to another one. I want to get back to this, but I know we have so many questions. You, right there, yeah.
All right, so this is a bit of a controversial question. I don't know if you want to talk about it.
All right.
Yeah.
It's an open floor, man. Try to stay safe.
So yes. But I'm asking because I respect your opinion. I want to hear your opinion on this. My question is, from your perspective, what has been either the positive or the negative effects of the so-called GamerGate?
Of course.
It's about ethics in game journalism.
You want to help me with this one? I can start. I don't know.
I want to keep this one short because I actually don't think it's worth a great deal of time. So here's a quick thing. I have seen the negative effects of GamerGate in a lot of games with good stuff for months and months. I've been out talking to politicians, talking to journalists, talking to people in the mainstream, trying to convince them to be interested in this culture, to not think of us just as people who run and gun, right? Not to think of us as the trench coat mafia and all this sort of thing. And then all of a sudden I started getting emails of you said all this stuff to us and you used all our time, and now I'm hearing about these gamers threatening to rape people and all this terrible. So it's just done a ton of damage to us in terms of public image. It's fractured our community, right? We all love games. Games are about joy. We should be playing together instead of being at each other's throats. And I really do. I mean, I fundamentally think that I did a lot of research on the GamerGate stuff, and I waded through all that, and I went point by point, and a lot of the stuff is like horrible misinformation. On the GamerGate stuff, it's clearly being manipulated by people who have a vested interest in it, right? Like, who are the leaders of the GamerGate community, right? It's Alex MAGfest from the MAGfest who I'm legally obligated not to talk about. So that should say something. It's Total Biscuit, who, on some sense, I love, but here's a guy who's calling out for journalism ethics. He takes huge amounts of money to endorse games, right? Like, if you guys haven't looked up something, look up an article on Gamasutra by the guys who made Guns Vickers, talking about how they paid him $20,000 to endorse their game. Right? I mean, that to me is way worse ethics, right? You want to talk about ethics in journalism, get the money out of it, right? This is the real problem. And so, like, point after point, it just like all falls apart. But it's all manipulated by people who either want something or want to deflect from some of the stuff that they're doing. So, I mean, I think it's worth our time. I think it's done damage to a community. I think it's done damage to reputation of a community. I think it is the last dying screams of people who are losing their power. I've said this before, right? The KKK was at its height. After World War II, the biggest it ever got was in the middle of desegregation. And I think it's a lot of people who thought, for years, saw the internet as their own territory that they could rule by shouting the loudest. And we're finally starting to civilize the internet. We've seen it on YouTube and Reddit. I mean, and even 4chan, right? Started to moderate, become a community, a society. And this is not a censorship issue. This is not. You want to talk about free speech? You have more free speech because we have laws, right? Most of us would have some strong dude beating the shit out of us and telling us we can't say anything against him in a place where we had no laws. And we're starting to add laws to the internet. We're starting to add rules to the internet. And it's going to make a place where more voices get heard. And this is the last screams of a group that's losing their power. I want to move on from GamerGate. I think that's. Do you have anything you want to say about GamerGate? Nope. Is that a non-GamerGate comment?
Yes, it is.
All right, move on.
Okay, so changing the subject. First of all, I've been following you guys since you guys have been on the Escapist, and I just want to thank you. You've kind of inspired me to actually, start looking into game design, and because all of you are really great. So, saying that, how do I explain to my dad what exactly game design is?
When you find out, please tell me.
Story. When I was making Stanley, I mean, there was years of me sitting in front of my laptop, that was it. I was just behind that thing. And I kind of specifically didn't want to I think even if I had tried to explain to them what was going on, it wouldn't have, they wouldn't have gotten it. And even when the thing was finished and they were able to play it, they wouldn't necessarily have the reference points to understand what was going on. But when they saw a comment on the internet from someone who said, I played this thing and it made me think about myself in a way that I hadn't before, they read that and then they got it. And I don't mean to hold that up as that's the answer, that's what you need to do, but there is a kind of social confirmation element where once you get that it's bigger than yourself, there's a something that I'm in service of something greater. I think that's an access point for a lot of parents who want their kids to be a part of something greater.
And I don't think you give your parents their credit either.
I think it depends though too, because a lot of us, especially the older you are or where your parents are from, it depends. My dad was born and raised on a farm in Ireland. He did not know video games are surpassed Pong till I started playing video games, 10 years ago. As we get farther and further, I think it's going to be a lot easier explaining video games to people and what it is, but it's still baby steps.
And gaming's becoming everywhere. I mean, there are moms and grandmas that play games on their phone, and it's going to become easier and easier to just have that conversation because you're going to say, oh, I want to make games, and they're going to go, oh, like this, and you're going, oh, not quite like that, but
So the hardest part is specifically describing game design, right? Because my mother plays plenty of Candy Crush, and she totally understands games. They all so you make games, but when they try to describe it, they understand art, they understand programming. I craft the experience. It's not fully.
I think you really gotta get across the element, the part where the humans are interacting with the thing. Because that was big for me with comics, because what blew my eyes about design was reading Understanding Comics.
Yes.
Scott McCloud talks about here's how you make a comic. He has a book for that. This book's all about here's how you, the person reading even this comic itself, are that's where design comes into play, because the design says this is how you're interacting with this, and this is how we're going to try and communicate this to you. And it was the same thing with learning about typeface and being oh, typeface isn't just a nice typeface and a pretty typeface. It has to do with how easy it is to read, how easy it is to replicate. I looked on a paper that someone has to actually interact with that, not necessarily the aesthetics or the utility, which I guess for games they're still seeing a lot as just kind of a commodity, just something that you buy and have and you own. It's distraction, it's just a thing, and I think we all understand that it's about interacting, the people interacting with it, because that's why we're all in this room right now. But people who don't interact with games, they don't see that because they haven't had the interaction or ever had to explicitly be forced to think about that, which is why I think the Stanley Parable was great at doing. It said it challenged the player to say, interact with this game not as a product, but actually as a game for once. And it's incredible. And I think that's why it's I don't know, that's the kind of game I maybe would judge my parents and say maybe do think about because the game's gonna almost kind of tell you outright how this game is.
I haven't actually done that. My brother-in-law doesn't play games at all, and we showed him the Stanley Parable. He loved it.
I think another important transition would be to understand an adaptation, say a book from a movie. Because a book has a writer and an editor. But if you think of a movie, you have a director, actors, the screenwriter, a cinematographer, an editor, a sound editor, musician, someone who makes the composition. It's a much bigger aspect because you're not just covering reading, you're covering visual and audio. So there's so much more to understand and try to develop to say, oh, well, what made that scene work? Well, it's because of all these other things. And that also can apply to games somewhat because it's well, why does this feel so right? Because the way it's laid out.
It's really interesting. I'm actually not sure I can give a really solid definition of what a director does. Right? I can give the broad strokes, but as we get more and more into crafting just experiences, the further we go down that hole, the harder it is to encapsulate. But I wanted to touch on one thing. If you guys haven't read Understanding Comics is amazing, and it's not only about comics, right? It will teach you how to think about a medium. And so you should definitely, if you get a chance and you're into that sort of thing, check it out.
But other comments or questions? Yes.
You mentioned earlier that one way to really enhance journalism is to get money out, but I feel like that comment privileges mediums that are already established. And as someone who, I'm trying to start my own blog, I don't know how to get money out and still earn a living because I don't have that user base I can turn to and say, support us on Patreon.
So it's more that as a whole, here's the problem, right? You go to a site like Kotaku, and Kotaku is entirely, they're ad funded, right? Who buys the ads for video game sites, right? It's video game companies. Not that we have to get money out, we just have to figure out ways to either move it, to the Patreon model, to the model that is sort of viewer funded, which I think is an amazing thing, or at least move it past the model where the only people who are paying us are the same people we're supposed to review and have oversight over. And even as such, I think as a small writer starting from thing, do what you need to do, but keep that in mind as you go further. Because if $750 is rent for next month and you need it, it makes it way harder to hand people's game. We're going to give you that $750 to do a swing, right? And it's never going to be a perfect system, right? In the ideal world, we can find some way. And this is why, by the way, this is the thing about film criticism. Film criticism survived, thrived, and grew because film critics were embedded in newspapers that were solely funded by the film companies. That hasn't happened with games. And so, in the abstract, we have to find some way to do that. They don't have a good answer. Yeah, take off. Thank you, everyone. If you see Dan. Give me a sec because I am missing 2 Dans. I saw them walk past the door before.
Right out here.
All right.
Oh, are they right there?
Dan, right out here. Hey, Dan. The
Green Dan?
the voice Dan.
Dan or other Dan?
The voice just Dan.
Alright, and we'll do that for as many everything. Yes, this is an autograph that they want from you, sir. Okay. Alright, so we had other questions. Go for it.
So in the games and mechanics, you mentioned that MMOs, as they tell stories, are kind of flawed because of their gameplay, which feels very like fun-epic and fighting reptiles and stuff. And with like games like the Elder Scrolls Online, which kind of have that big problem, and that all the other Elder Scrolls games make you the central chosen one. And MMO world puts you in a world where you can't really be the chosen one because there's millions of chosen ones walking around. Is there a better way to do storytelling in MMOs, where you can interact with your fellow citizens of your MMO?
This is a really good question. So storytelling in MMOs. I think way back we did an episode on storytelling in sort of uncharted worlds and other ways to do storytelling in MMOs. I am a huge fan of, rather than thinking of it as a traditional narrative, think about the story in the MMO as a mythos, right? As a myth cycle, in the same way that you go and read myths. It's not one story. There's a bunch of stories which just inhere in this world. And I returned to MMOs because I actually think not being constrained by doing what the right thing to do was, they actually ended up doing a lot of things right that we would never do today. But, for example, there was this, I think we talked about this in the episode that we also talked about Secret World. But there's this moment in the first EverQuest where you are fighting a low-level group of gnolls, whatever, you're fighting down into this big pit. You get to the bottom, there's this lake. There's nothing in there. There's no
if you dive in, periodically you'll find a ring, right? It has an inscription, described in the text on the ring. And as you move around the world, you start finding out about who this person is, you can talk to NPCs, and there's part of this larger myth, and then you can find weapons and whole things connected to this, and it expands the world out. And all these pieces are interconnected. A skeleton in a dungeon somewhere isn't just a skeleton in a dungeon somewhere, but connected to somebody in that world. You get their weapon, and it's some famous weapon. And so rather than having one directed story, they make a solid, holistic world that feels like a real world, that has the progression that an individual, a heroic individual, but not the chosen one, in that world could have. And so there's also all these factions and different groups that can see you in different ways, and as you start drifting towards one or the other through the actions you choose, through the moral path you take through the game, you start advancing a storyline within that group, right? Because you may be right, and a smaller one for each of these instances, rather than trying to make you the epic chosen one. This is a world where that exists, a holistic world that has this whole myth cycle, that has all these legends, that has all this lore to it. And within that world, small stories can happen. And some of those small stories can start.
Something that I want to add to that is sometimes you need to find a storyline and a mechanic that can work in an MMO to match the scale of what's actually going on. A random game that I played on the internet, it was a web game. I can't remember the name, but you play as a cat and you just wander around and there's a bunch of other cats and all you can do is meow. But you just wander around and you can see all these other people playing as cats and you wander around the neighborhood and you just discover the neighborhood. It creates the sense of scale and mechanics match what's going on.
Can you please remember the name of this game?
It's a silly cat at Flash.
There's like one game called like Cat the MMO, which is just you wander around, like there's like some secrets and there's like a tree house you can climb in, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, but you're also a cat.
Can you customize the cat?
No. You can't even type in.
Well, it's a chat.
Oh, okay. The one I'm thinking of, there is like kind of a chat.
Yeah, you just type in meow, or everything you say.
I feel like there's a James Recommend somewhere in here.
They're good.
I'm glad editing that. Do you think that the massive success of World of Warcraft and the fact that so many games basically went, oh my gosh, World of Warcraft is so successful, just make World of Warcraft with a different skin on it, sort of set, I mean, not to say that World of Warcraft wasn't good, but sort of set the MMO industry back a little bit as far as innovation and craft more interesting worlds and stuff, because they were more concerned with, oh, let's make a game that plays like WoW and we'll deal with everything later.
So this is a really interesting point, because this is actually one that's sort of essential to our industry. I love World of Warcraft, right? I spent too many hours of my life on World of Warcraft. But I think it was a step back as a player, right? As an aficionado of MMOs, as the player, just in the same way that some art critics may say that. So for those of us who are really into this, really fun, who love gaming, yes, it was a step back. There's less there. But in doing so, it was also genius. They did a lot of things to smooth everything out, to make sure that everybody wins, to make sure that everybody can play this game. That brought in a huge audience. So I understand the genius of it. But as a player, as a personal player, not as a designer, but just as a player, I do think it was a step backwards. And it defining what MMO was for so long has proved very limiting for the industry. I think we're coming to the tail end of that because with the failure of both Star Wars and of what was that?